Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the newest album from Ghost, titled Meliora. But first, let's talk a little bit about Satanism. I don't know about you guys, but I went to a Catholic school growing up. I remember being fascinated by the sections on the occult near the back of our textbooks. Mostly because I did a lot of the research and was kind of amused to discover how much early Christianity appropriated and stole from those pagan faiths. But Satanism in and of itself, the worship of Lucifer, is something altogether different. And in modern sects, they tend to revere Satan as a symbol of individualism more than a distinctive deity. They most often show up in the news not so much as a murderous cult, but as countercultural trolls pointing out the hypocrisies in fundamentalist Christianity. And speaking as a Catholic, albeit one with a complex faith, yeah, I can't entirely disagree with a lot of the stuff they have to say, given the mutated state of modern evangelical and fundamentalist Christianity, especially in the United States, most of which seems to be spiraling towards idiocracy, but that's a different video. But one of the things I always found kind of hilarious in those old Catholic textbooks were the accusations that besides role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons leading to Satanism, there was also heavy metal music. And here's the thing, with the exception of certain black metal bands, mostly in Norway, most heavy metal acts, especially in the 70s and 80s, only utilized satanic imagery to add a sacrilegious air to their music, more for image and style and less for the message. And given that I'm quite secure in my own faith, I've never really had an issue listening to music that falls in this vein, especially if it's good. It's entertainment, people. I don't exactly take this seriously. But on that note, let's talk about one of the more openly sacrilegious bands, Ghost, formerly known as Ghost BC in the United States because of copyright nonsense. They're most well known on tour for their stage presence. All the members are considered nameless ghouls except for the main singer and frontman, who dresses like a satanic pope, is called the Papa Emeritus, and is replaced with every single album. And all this feels kind of a little bit kitschy in a Kiss sort of way, their first album confirmed that with a defiantly 70s inspired sound that calls back to Black Sabbath, Pentagram, maybe a little bit of Rainbow or Deep Purple. And since I like a lot of that style of hard rock, their debut album Opus Eponymous in 2010 really did work for me. Not quite as crushing or heavy as most modern metal, but making up for it with some really potent grooves and some rollicking guitar chops. These guys can play. They got cleaner and heavier on their 2013 album Infesta Sumum, but simultaneously traded in more potent grooves for cleaner tones and theatrical bombast that only made some of their satanic lyricism seem really goofy. Definitely a disappointing album, even though I would say it's not exactly bad. But with Buzz suggesting the group is going to go back to get darker and rougher on this next album, I had a reason there'd be quality here. So, how does Meliora turn out? Well, it's actually pretty damn great. Effectively what Ghost should have done back in 2013 with their sophomore follow-up album. The melodic grooves are thicker and heavier, the theatricality is there, but handled with a little bit more gravitas and texture, and while the lineage to classical heavy metal is plainer than ever, Ghost proves they can actually write good songs and hooks beyond the riffing to put together a demonic display that really is ridiculously enjoyable. I'm not going to say it's without faults, so we're gonna get to them, but it's definitely a return to form, and that's a pleasure to behold because this is a great album and definitely worth your time. So let's start with the biggest major improvements, and that's in the instrumentation and the production. Placing Andy Wallace at the production board to bring in prominent melody was the first major step in the right direction, especially on the guitars, and the second was bringing in some real heft to the grooves to reach some pummeling intensity, even if they can feel pulled straight from a modern version of Deep Purple's playbook. Where Opus Eponymous was more skeletal and stripped bass, Ghost intensifies their bass lines and grooves with enough melodies to keep them distinctive even as they span choppy riffing on Cerise, the odd piano flourishes on Mummy Dust that almost reminds me a little bit of Angel Dust era Faith No More, the bass-heavy dustiness of No Absolution, particularly in the cymbals, and the ticking clock of Deus Ex in Absentia, with even more theatrical stingers on every riff. That theatricality is much more finely tuned on this album, mostly because the band has stepped away from instrumental camp for some more bluesy swagger on songs like Majesty that can swear as a melodic chorus straight from Traced Air era Cynic, or the folk and prog metal swell behind He Is, although a lot of credit there has to go to the progressive and surprisingly complex drum patterns that cascade down to really augment those grooves. Now granted, one of the other major bonuses is that Ghost doesn't shy away from soaring, instantly memorable choruses that would be corny as hell if they weren't as immediately catchy and potent, with He Is, From the Pinnacle to the Pit, No Absolution, and Deus in Absentia featuring some of their best. And of course, there are plenty of solos to show off some superb guitar work, particularly on Cerise and Mummy Dust, even if I don't exactly love the guitar tones that they chose. And if I were to nitpick a little bit, it would come in some of the tones in their layering. The piano stings and flourishes to augment the melodies are fantastic, but the synthesizers, the organs, and theremin could have been given a slightly meatier tone or a little bit more volume and texture to really mesh into the mix. I like the spacier elements, they sound really good, reminiscent of Aerion's heavier side in a good way, but they could have been a bigger component on this album and I wouldn't have complained. And on a similar note, the two instrumental interludes are very well played, but I couldn't help but feel that they both could have been expanded to of full tracks in their own right. And on a 10-song album with 2 interludes and tracks like Cerise and Majesty and Deus in Absentia that can feel a little bit long and stretched, the ideas could have been spread around a little bit better. And then we've got our vocalists, Papa Emeritus III. Gotta be blunt here, when he's multi-tracked and more theatrical, he's perfectly serviceable, but that's part of the problem. He's only serviceable when this is a band that's screaming out for symphonic or more explosive vocal presence that it just doesn't really have. Yes, I know part of this is a callback to that older era of early metal, but as Ghost brings in more modern, heavier riffs and symphonic swell, the lack of stronger vocals really does hurt them going forward. At his best, he's got a raspy sort of dark presence that sort of sounds like a light version of Mike Patton, but at his worst on songs like Cerise, he comes across as nasal and honestly completely out of his depth. But in a sense, it does kind of work for Ghost, and explain why we have to talk about lyrics and themes. Now, for those of you who've been keeping track, the first 2 Ghost albums mostly followed a loose narrative surrounding the birth and life of the Antichrist. But Meliora goes to something a little bit more high concept and abstract, specifically imagining a near future world where there is no God, and the only true faith is that of the Satanic Church of Ghost. And this allows them to get a little bit more creative when it comes to their imagery and their songwriting, even if I do think songs like Spirit can feel a little bit clunky on the technical level. Take From the Pinnacle to the Pit, a song that shows the steep fall that can come of a modern church leader getting corrupted, or Mummy Dust showing the decaying faith suffocating under the weight of its own corruption and greed, a faith that is really dead but still moving, and with the futuristic undertones definitely recalls Warhammer 40k in a good way. And this allows Ghost to show their own faith as looser and more genuine, not just empty ritual, which allows Papa Emeritus III's softer vocals to work as a little bit more inviting, whether it be Enticement to True Corruption on Cerise, or the Revelry in Deus in Absentia, a title that literally means in Latin, God is absent. It makes the implication that humanity is naturally drawn to that higher authority, and sets up the enticing parallel between empty, heavily dusty, structured ritual, or the burning, egalitarian rebels that at least have some passion and soul behind them. And then there's He Is, the centerpiece of this album, one of the best songs Ghost has ever written. It will probably end up as one of my favorite songs of 2015, bar none. And it's a folk-inspired power ballad of 2 lovers finding solace in the inviting dawn of Lucifer, which, if you know the translation, Lucifer means light bringer. The contrast is stunning. Not only does it further prove my thesis that metal acts make the best modern power ballads these days, but there's a soaring clarity to the melodies that not only feels authentic, but that any modern Christian act would kill to appropriate and use in their own music. That's the underlying key to understanding this album. Meliora, a word that means the pursuit of something more, does not forsake faith as most modern Satanists do, but finds the heart within it. And the fact that passion is in Satanism underlies the irony of all. When you look at, say, televangelism or fundamentalist intolerance or ignorance wrapped up in ritual that feels increasingly hollow or token, Ghost is making the implication that the future they're describing might not be that far off, if it isn't already here. Now, okay, don't get me wrong, my own personal faith in a higher power is more complex to be really shaken by this, and frankly, the Catholicism structure around it is more for arch convenience on my part than anything else. As I've said, Jesus had some smart stuff. His apostles and future church leaders didn't really follow that example, although I appreciate Pope Francis for trying, but again, another video. But it's not as if Ghost isn't making some real points about the state of modern faith and religion, and they're making much better music than the vast majority of evangelical Christian rock and Christian metal, for that note, that isn't nearly as tuneful, energetic, soaring, or interesting, to say nothing of fun. In short, I really like this album a lot. It's getting a strong 8 out of 10 from me. If you're interested in a modern update of classical heavy metal, and you could take the satanic stuff with a grain of salt, definitely give this a listen. Otherwise, you know what? Might be devilish, might be demonic, but I know quality then I hear it. So check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Folks, keep the religious debate. I know it might come up in the comments, but keep it civil. I appreciate that. Almost seems like coming out saying you have a religion on the internet is almost worse than coming out and saying you're gay. But that's a different story entirely. So if there's anything else I may be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.